Testing. Testing. Oh my god. I have no idea if anyone will ever hear this. I'm recording this in the event that I'm not able to tell people what's happened to me in the last 4 hours. Actually, to really tell this story properly, I need to start 2 days ago when this all first started. It all started with an unexpected package in the mail. I opened the small rectangular door of my tiny mailbox in the tiny mail kiosk outside my tiny studio apartment, and there it was. A perfectly innocuous-looking manila envelope. 20 minutes later, I was sitting at my tiny desk beside my bed reading the contents. One letter typed and addressed to me. My hands were shaking. I should tell you that I spent the last 8 months trying to get writing jobs. At first, I did what any and all new writers do. I applied for full-time newspaper jobs, staff writer jobs, technical writer jobs, any kind of full-time job that involved writing. Then I went to the next rung, freelance. Freelance newspaper assignments, news blog articles. Month after month I applied, and all I heard back was the deafening roar of silence. Not fun. I tried getting a literary agent, but of course these days you have to have some published articles before you can get an agent. I worked part-time jobs to pay the rent and completed dozens of one-off articles and media reviews, most unpaid. And despite the fact that my name was going from completely unknown to only mostly unknown, a small but significant step, or so my English teacher kept telling me, I was starting to slip into despair. And so my hands shook as I read the contents of this letter that I had plucked from the manila envelope that had appeared so unexpectedly in my mailbox. The letter was from the offices of Mr. Marion DeSilvio, with an invitation to interview him at his local estate. I was ecstatic. For those of you who don't know, Marion DeSilvio was a wealthy entrepreneur who's bought and settled into the Drake Gardens estate just over a year ago. The sale was highly publicized locally, but if anyone had seen or spoken with DeSilvio, they weren't telling anyone. And so a steadily rising tide of curiosity had reached a peak. This letter, offering me an exclusive interview with DeSilvio, could be my ticket to a full-time writing assignment. And who knows what else. Although the original correspondence from DeSilvio had arrived in the form of a physical letter, the assistant handling his letters had been kind enough to provide an email address on a brief note included in the envelope. My fingers trembled as I typed out a return message, saying that I would be delighted to interview Mr. DeSilvio. I scanned my email once more to make sure I hadn't accidentally made any glaring grammar errors and no words were misspelled. I must have looked over it for at least 2 more times before I told myself to relax, and I clicked on the send button. Then I marked the date on my calendar and went about my usual mundane, day-to-day activities. But something was different. I found myself doing my usual tasks and running my usual errands, but I'd catch myself humming a tune or just perpetually smiling like a girl in a movie. For the first time in a long while, I actually had something incredible to look forward to. The day of the interview finally arrived, and as I drove up the winding road to Mr. DeSilvio's estate, I couldn't help but notice how unbelievably beautiful the surrounding countryside was. It was around 9 a.m., and the leaves had just started to fall, and so the trees were lit up in all different hues and shades of fall. I wanted to stop and look around at the trees in all their glory, but I wanted to make sure I wouldn't be late to reach the estate. If I had known that I would end up sitting in a ghastly basement that reminded me of some Halloween dungeon haunted house ride, I would have stayed outside and enjoyed those beautiful fall leaves forever, and never set foot on the DeSilvio lands. But I was so blinded by my excitement that I couldn't see anything but the dazzling future I imagined before me. As the wheels of my precious old beat-up car sped down the pavement, the few leaves that had fallen were lifted off the ground by my tires, and I could see them whirling through the air behind me. I felt like I was on some magical rocket, with the orange and red flames of my jet engine flaring out behind me as I flew through the air to a new, undiscovered part of my life. When I reached the gate to the DeSilvio estate, a uniformed security guard walked over to my car and smiled warmly at me, as if I had visited the mansion a dozen times. The gate was a beautiful wrought iron design with expanses of thin but strong-looking iron bars, joined by columns of stone and mortar. The guard must have noticed me staring at it and told me it was 10 feet tall. I told him I didn't think I could climb over it if I wanted to, and he laughed. He said his name was Carl and asked if I would park in one of the designated visitor parking spaces outside the gate. I parked my little car in the space, and it looked even smaller beside the enormous fence. Carl walked me through the entryway to a little motorized cart, and we rode up the path made of meticulously cut concrete slabs from the gate to the top of a hill. I was spellbound by the beauty of the property. Parts of it had clearly been carefully landscaped and cared for, but as we went over the top of the hill and entered a forest area, I could see that most of the grounds were wild. A canopy of multicolored leaves overhead gave me the feeling of being tucked in and hidden against the scrutinizing eyes of the outside world, and the air took on a cool, quiet quality. I felt safe. As we rode along the path, the trees of the forest began to thin, and then as we rounded the corner, I saw the De Silvio mansion for the first time. It was like something out of a period film. It wasn't a castle, like some enormous structure out of a fairy tale storybook. It was larger than any house I'd ever seen, but it had the look and the feel of someone's home. I was instantly envious of whoever lived there in this beautiful stone mansion, with magnificent columns and high-arched Gothic windows tucked safely inside a mystical forest. I couldn't help but let out a romantic sigh. Carl stopped the little motorized cart in front of the mansion, where a stone-paved path leading to the large, wooden front doors left the concrete path which continued off to the side towards an area off to the left. I thanked him, and with a warm smile he waved, and then drove away, leaving me to where the warm flagstone path left the familiar concrete. I took a deep breath, and I strode towards the doors. When I was about 10 feet from the entrance, I was just a bit startled when I heard a sound from the large doors. It was a sudden, metallic sound that caught me just off guard for some reason, and then the left-hand door opened. Out onto the stone terrace just in front of the entryway stepped a tall man with chestnut-brown hair and a warm smile. He was dressed in a dark burgundy blazer over a pair of black slacks. His shirt was a dark gray, and he wore it open collar. I'm not typically good at guessing a man's age, but I would have said he was somewhere in his late 30s or early 40s. His smile was warm, and it made me feel comfortable. "Hello," he said in a strong, gentle voice. "I'm Marion De Silvio. I'm happy you've come." I couldn't say what it was at the time, but something about Mr. De Silvio impressed me. I couldn't tell exactly what I was feeling at the time, but something about his presence seemed to affect the world around him. If only I'd known then what I know now.